They called him a liar in front of the whole neighborhood. An old man in a worn army jacket, standing on his porch with shaking hands, trying to explain why a small dog meant more to him than anything in the world. The crowd laughed. Some pulled out their phones. A kid in the back yelled, "Prove it, old man." And that's when the dog moved. William Hartley had lived on Clover Street for 31 years. His house was modest, peeling white paint, a garden that hadn't been tended in 2 seasons, and a wooden wind chime his late wife Margaret had hung the summer before she passed. He was 74 years old, walked with slight drag in his left leg, and spoke slowly, not because he was dim, but because he had learned, after decades of hard living, that words carried weight. The dog's name was Smoky, a Yorkshire Terrier, barely 4 pounds, with fur the color of storm clouds and eyes that seemed to hold conversations without speaking a single word. William had found her 6 months ago at the edge of the city park, sitting in the rain beside an overturned garbage can, staring at him like she'd been waiting for him specifically. He'd wrapped her in his jacket and carried her home. He had not been alone since. But on this particular Tuesday morning, the argument had started simply enough. A neighbor, Raymond Cho, 43, a property developer who had recently moved in 3 houses down, had told the local HOA that William was disturbing the peace, making up war stories to avoid the new community pet ordinance that required all dogs over 6 months to be registered and microchipped. Raymond had gathered an audience, and William, standing on his porch with Smoky tucked under one arm, had looked at every single face and felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear, recognition. He had felt this before, the moment before everything changes. "I serve this country," William said quietly, "and this dog is the reason I'm still here." Nobody believed him. Not yet, but Smoky's ears had just gone straight up. If this story moves you, follow the channel and leave a like. Everyone helps us keep telling stories like this. The argument hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for weeks, the way pressure builds beneath the surface of still water. Raymond Cho had a vision for Clover Street. Trimmed hedges, uniform mailboxes, no eyesores. William Hartley's house, with its peeling paint and wind chime, and now a small dog that barked at the moon, was an eyesore. Raymond had begun documenting complaints in a spreadsheet. He had presented it to the HOA board on a Thursday evening with a laser pointer and a slide deck. He was efficient. He was thorough. He was completely wrong about William. The morning it all came to a head began with Smoky barking before sunrise. Not her usual alert bark. The sharp, single note she used when a squirrel crossed a fence, but a long, low, sustained sound that William had never heard from her before. He sat up in bed, heart hammering, and found her standing at the window, her tiny body rigid, staring at the street below. He looked. Nothing. Just the gray pre-dawn light and a garbage truck idling 3 blocks away. "Easy, girl," he said, but Smoky didn't stop. By 7 in the morning, Raymond had knocked on the door with 2 HOA board members and a printed copy of the community pet ordinance. He was polite in a way that sharp things are sometimes polished, smooth until they cut. He explained that Smoky needed to be registered, that proof of vaccination was required, that there were rules, and rules existed for everyone, and no one was above them. Not even, he paused, glancing at William's old jacket veterans. He said the word like it was a costume someone might put on for sympathy. William heard the tone. He had heard it before, in a different time, in a different place, from men who had also underestimated him. He said nothing. He simply looked at Raymond, and then at Smoky, who had come to sit directly on William's left boot, and was looking up at Raymond with the kind of calm, steady attention that made Raymond, almost imperceptibly, take a half step back. "Give me a week," William said. "I'll get the paperwork sorted." Raymond shook his head. "We've given you 2 notices already, Mr. Hartley. Today we need a response." And that was when the neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Delgado, came out with her morning coffee and asked what was happening. and then the man from number 14, and then the Patel kids who were supposed to be walking to school. Within 20 minutes, Clover Street had an audience, and Raymond had won, and something in him decided to use it. He's been telling people he was some kind of war hero, Raymond said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. That this dog is a service animal, that she's trained, that she's special. He made air quotes around the word special, and a few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. I looked into it. There are no records, no registration, no documentation, nothing. William stood very still, the drag in his left leg, the one that had been there since 1971, always got worse when he was under stress, and he could feel it now, a deep, low ache that traveled from his ankle to his hip like a slow fire. He kept his face neutral. He had practiced that face for a long time. I'm not asking for special treatment, William said. I never have. Then prove it, Raymond said. Prove you served. Prove this dog is what you say she is. Because right now, what I see is an unregistered animal and a man making claims he can't back up. The crowd was quiet in that particular way. Crowds get quiet when they sense something real is about to happen. Not entertainment, but truth. Even the Patel kids had stopped moving. Smoky, still sitting on William's boot, turned her head slowly toward Raymond. Then she did something none of them expected. She walked, not trotted, walked, with slow, deliberate steps, off the porch, down the 3 wooden stairs, across the front path, and straight to the large clay pot beside the garden gate that held the dead remnants of last year's roses. She began to dig. "What is she doing?" Mrs. Delgado asked. Nobody answered. They all watched. Smoky dug with a focus that was almost mechanical, her small paws moving in rapid, precise strokes, dirt flying behind her. It took 4 minutes. Then she stopped, lowered her nose into the hole, and came up with something in her mouth. She turned. She walked back up the porch steps. She sat at William's feet and looked up at him. William crouched down slowly, his knee aching with the effort. He took the thing from Smoky's mouth with both hands. He held it up. It was a military dog tag, tarnished, soil-darkened, hanging from a rusted chain. He rubbed his thumb across it. His name, his serial number, his blood type, and the year, 1968. The street was completely silent. Nobody asked immediately how a dog tag from 1968 ended up buried in the clay pot beside William's gate. The question hung in the air, visible as smoke, but no one lit it. Raymond opened his mouth once, and then closed it. Mrs. Delgado had put her coffee cup down on her porch railing, without looking at it, and it had tipped over and fallen into the rose bushes, and she hadn't noticed. William held the tag in both hands the way you hold something you thought was gone forever, carefully, like the act of holding it might undo it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing something complicated. It was the youngest Patel, 7 years old, round-faced, still in her school uniform, who finally spoke. "What does it say?" William looked at her. Something shifted in his face. He crouched down again, ignoring the protest of his knee, and held the tag out so she could see. "It says my name," he said. "William J. Hartley, and a number that the Army gave me when I was 22 years old, a long time before you were born." "Why was it in the dirt?" she asked. "That," William said, standing slowly, "is a very long story." He looked at Raymond. Raymond was looking at the tag with an expression that moved through several rooms. Skepticism, calculation, and something that might have been, if you looked quickly, the beginning of shame. "I buried it," William said, "in 1987, the year Margaret and I moved into this house. I wasn't ready to look at it anymore, and I wasn't ready to throw it away. So I put it in the ground with the roses." He paused. "I forgot which pot." "How did the dog know?" Mrs. Delgado asked softly. William looked down at Smoky, who had returned his boot, and was now cleaning her front paw with supreme indifference, as if she had simply done a small errand and saw no reason for all the fuss. "I don't know," William said honestly, "but she's found things before. My reading glasses, Margaret's old bracelet that fell behind the radiator, a letter I thought I'd thrown away." He was quiet for a moment. "Some dogs just know." Raymond Cho said, in a voice noticeably quieter than before, "I'd still need to see proof of vaccination." "Raymond." It was Mrs. Delgado, and her tone was the tone of a woman who had been patient long enough. "Hush." William had not talked about the tag in 37 years. He had barely thought about it. In the way you don't think about a stone you place over something buried. You know it's there, you walk past it, you don't look down. But standing on his porch with 20 neighbors watching him and Smoky sitting at his feet and the tag in his hand, warm from the pressure of his thumb, the story started to come up the way groundwater comes up. Not force, just rising. He had been 22 when he shipped out. Vietnam, 1968, the year everything broke. He had been a combat medic, assigned to the 4th Infantry Division, operating in the Central Highlands. He did not talk about what he saw there. He never had, not even to Margaret, not in full. But he talked about the tag. "They give you two," he said to the crowd, though he wasn't really speaking to them anymore. He was speaking into the past. "One stays on the body if you're killed. One goes with the report. I came home with both of mine, which meant I had made it, which is what you're supposed to want." He turned the tag in his fingers. But for a long time, having it felt worse than not having it. Survivor's guilt, they call it now. In 1971, when William came home, they didn't call it anything. They told you to be glad you were back. They told you to get a job. They told you to move on. William had moved on. He had married Margaret, worked 30 years at the shipyard, raised one son who now lived in Portland and called every Sunday. But moving on and healing are not always the same journey. Smoky sneezed. The crowd laughed, surprised, nervous, relieved. Smoky looked mildly offended. "She doesn't like dust," William said, and allowed himself a small smile. "She has opinions about cleanliness." "Mr. Hartley," said one of the HOA board members, a woman named Claire who had not said anything yet, "would you be willing to come to our next meeting? Just to talk." She glanced sideways at Raymond. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding about the nature of your situation." William looked at Claire. He looked at Raymond. He looked at Smoky. Smoky looked back at him with her storm cloud eyes and appeared to be withholding comment. "I suppose I could," William said, "if someone brings coffee." There are things that happen in a marriage that have no witnesses and leave no records, but are more real than anything you could document. Margaret had known, without William ever telling her directly, what he had brought home from Vietnam, not in the luggage, in the silences, in the way he slept, flat on his back with his fists closed, and the way he startled that car. Backfires and a particular stillness that came over him every November 11th. She had not pushed. Margaret Hartley was a woman of great patience and greater intelligence, and she understood that some doors have to be opened from the inside. She had built a life around William that made room for the parts of him he couldn't explain, and she had loved him, not in spite of what the war had done to him, but inclusive of it, the way you love a landscape that includes both the beautiful and the scarred. William talked about her the way people talk about whether they've survived, what kind of reverence or force of it. She knew about the tag, he told Mrs. Delgado later that afternoon, when they were sitting on his porch drinking the coffee Claire had actually, remarkably, delivered. "She knew I'd buried it. She didn't ask me why. She just said, 'Make sure you remember which pot,' because she knew my memory." He laughed softly. She was right. I forgot which pot. 40-something years, Mrs. Delgado said. 41. We moved in 87. She passed in 2019. He looked out at the garden. 32 years in this house. She planted those roses the first spring. They died when she did. He paused. Except the pot. That pot just grew weeds and held things for me, apparently. Smoky was on his lap now, the way she had taken to sitting. not curled but upright, like a very small sentinel. She was watching the street with professional focus. She found something else once, William said. About 3 months after I got Smoky. I was looking for my VA card, needed it for an appointment. Couldn't find it anywhere. Searched the whole house. Smoky disappeared for about 10 minutes. Came back with the card in her mouth. She got into the drawer in the bedroom. The stuck one, the one I never opened. He shook his head. Margaret kept cards in that drawer. Birthday cards. My cards. Things I didn't know were there. Mrs. Delgado was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe she's not just finding things." William looked at her. "Maybe she's returning them." It would be easy to make Raymond Cho the villain of this story. He had the posture for it. The pressed shirt, the clipboard, the habit of speaking in the language of policy. But Raymond Cho was also a man who had driven 4 hours every other weekend for the past 2 years to visit his father in a memory care facility in Connecticut, and who paid for out of pocket without complaint, and who had never once mentioned this fact to anyone on Clover Street. His father, James Cho, had been an engineer. Sharp, precise, methodical. Raymond had inherited the methodical part, though the sharpness had shifted direction and become harder in him than it had been in his father. James Cho was now 78 and could no longer remember the name of Raymond's mother, who had been dead for 15 years. On the good days, he remembered Raymond. On the bad ones, he asked Raymond who he was. Raymond had grown up in a house where documentation mattered, where proof mattered, where if you said something, you had evidence for it. His father had taught him that if you can't show your work, you don't know your answer. Raymond had applied this principle to everything, including, it had to be admitted, situations where it was not the most humane tool. He had not meant to humiliate William Hartley. He had meant to enforce a rule. He understood, watching the dog come back up those porch stairs with a tag in her mouth, that he had done something else entirely. And that understanding sat in him like a wrong note that you can't unhear. He knocked on William's door that evening. Alone. No clipboard. William answered. Smoky was under his arm, alert, watching Raymond with the measuring attention of a small judge. "I owe you an apology," Raymond said. "What I did this morning was, I made it a public thing when it should have been private. That wasn't right." William studied him for a moment. Then he opened the door a little wider. "You drink coffee?" he asked. Raymond blinked. "Yes." "Come in," William said. "I have a story I need to practice telling anyway." Raymond sat at William's kitchen table and said very little, which turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. The kitchen was the kind of room that accumulates a life. Mismatched mugs, a corkboard covered in clippings and photographs, a windowsill with 3 small ceramic figures that had the particular stiffness of things someone made by hand. There was a photo of Margaret near the refrigerator, young, laughing, holding a fish she'd clearly just caught, wearing an expression of gleeful triumph. William caught Raymond looking at it. "Largemouth bass," William said, setting the coffee down. "She caught it. I had to clean it. That was the deal." He sat across from Raymond, and for a moment both men just held their mugs. "I was a medic," William said. "People think that means you're in the safe part. You're not. You go where the injured are, which is where the shooting is." Raymond said nothing. "Listen, I had these hands." William set down his mug and looked at his palms. They were the hands of an old man now, lined and spotted, knuckles thick from a lifetime of work. "These hands, I use them to keep people alive. I also," he stopped, "I couldn't always. That's the part they don't tell you about medicine. You're trained to believe you can fix things. And then you learn there are things that can't be fixed. You learn that lesson very fast. Over there." He picked the coffee back up. "The tag is, it's from a night in '69. I won't say more than that. It's from a night when I did everything right and it didn't matter. The tag came to represent that. For me, that feeling. I couldn't throw it away because it meant something, and I couldn't look at it because of what it meant. So I buried it. He smiled faintly. Seemed logical at the time. And the dog found it, Raymond said. The dog found it. William looked over at Smoky, who had arranged herself in the kitchen chair beside the window and was watching the evening birds with scowly attention. I don't know what she is, he said quietly. I've had dogs before. Good dogs. Normal dogs. She's something different. She pays attention the way medics learn to pay attention. Constant. Total. Like she's always taking a reading of what's around her. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My father was in the army. Korea. He never talked about it either. William looked at him. His memory is going now, Raymond said. Sometimes he talks about it. He doesn't know he's talking out loud. He calls out names. He cleared his throat. I think I've been trying to bring order to things, because I can't bring order to that. Smoky got down from her chair, walked across the kitchen, and sat down directly on Raymond's foot. Neither man said anything. Raymond looked down at her. She looked up at him. After a moment, he very carefully reached down and let her sniff his hand. She did. Then she put her chin on his knee. She doesn't do that with everyone, William said. No. He picked up his coffee. She must think you need it. His name was Daniel Hartley, and he called every Sunday at 11 a.m., which was 8 a.m. his time in Portland, which meant he set an alarm for it, which told you something about the kind of son he was. He had his father's stillness, but his mother's laugh, and he worked in sustainable architecture, designed buildings that breathe. He always said, buildings that worked with the land instead of against it. He had 2 kids, a boy named Leo and a girl named June. They called William every other Sunday with Daniel. And William kept their drawings on the refrigerator, held up with old tourist magnets he and Margaret had collected from every state they'd driven through. Daniel had not known about the tag. He had known that his father had served, had known the limp and the closed Novembers, and the way his dad never watched war movies. But the tag was news. When William called him Monday morning, breaking the Sunday-only rhythm, which Daniel registered immediately as significant, and told him the whole story, the crowd, the HOA Raymond and Smoky's dig, there was a long silence on the line. Dad, Daniel said. I'm fine, William said preemptively. I know you're fine. Another pause. She found in the pot with the dead roses. Those are the ones. Mom planted those. Yes. Another long silence, the kind that, between a father and son, contains entire years. Dad, Daniel said more quietly, are you doing okay? With the memory stuff? The tag. I just want to make sure. My memory is sharp, William said, a shade of amusement in his voice. I knew it was in a pot. I just forgot which one. There's a difference. There's absolutely a difference, Daniel agreed. I just meant, is all of this? Does it feel okay? Bringing it back up? William looked at Smoky, who was on the kitchen table. Strictly forbidden territory, sitting with the specific innocent of an animal who knows full well she's breaking a rule, but has calculated that the rule will not be enforced right now. You know the strangest thing, William said. It kind of does. I think it's her. Having her here. She makes it easier. To be in the house. To be in the past. He paused. She keeps me in the present, I think. Even when I go back. She pulls me forward. Daniel was quiet. Then, I want to come out. Next month, me and the kids. June wants to meet the dog. June will be Smoky's favorite, William predicted. Smoky prefers people who don't overthink. Are you calling me an overthinker? I'm calling you my son, William said, which implies certain traits. If you made it this far and this story means something to you, follow the channel and hit like. It helps more than you know. And there are 20 more parts of William's story to come. Word travels on Clover Street the way it travels on every street where people lived alongside each other long enough. Through windows, over fences, in the 3-minute conversations that happened at the end of driveways. By Wednesday, every household within 4 blocks knew at least a version of what happened. Some versions were accurate. Some had the dog jumping a fence and digging up a whole garden. One version had Raymond crying, which was not accurate, though he had cleared his throat several times with suspicious heaviness. What was universally agreed upon, the old man with the dog had served. The dog had done something no one could fully explain. And the neighborhood, which had mostly treated William as background, a fixture like the mailbox or the wind chime, suddenly understood that it had been living beside a history it hadn't bothered to read. Mrs. Delgado brought lemon cake on Wednesday afternoon. She did not ring the bell, but left it on the porch with a note that said, simply, "Thank you for your service." I should have said that sooner. The Patel family, both parents, all 3 kids, came by Thursday morning. The father, Ravi, shook William's hand with both of his and held it a beat longer than handshakes usually last. He had grown up in a military family in India, he explained, and something about the scene on Tuesday had moved him in a way he was still processing. His daughter, the youngest one who had asked about the tag, had apparently told her entire class about the dog who found the soldier's necklace, and her teacher had asked if Mr. Hartley might consider coming to speak. No pressure, just if he was willing. William said he would think about it. Claire from the HOA board came with paperwork. Not an ordinance, not a requirement, but a request. There was a small community bulletin she put out quarterly. She wanted to write something about Smoky, about service animals, and about veterans in the neighborhood, and about how sometimes a community doesn't know what it has until something forces it to look. She was apologetic, careful, almost tentative. William told her yes. Raymond, for his part, had done something quiet and unexpected. He had called the local veterans of foreign wars post, the one 3 miles away, the one William had not set foot in since 2004, and mentioned William's name. He didn't tell William. He didn't know yet if anything would come of it, but he made the call. Some forms of apology don't come with language. He had told the story of finding her many times now, the rain, the park, the garbage can, but there were details he had not yet told anyone. Details he was still, in some ways, making sense of himself. The day he found Smoky was November 11th, Veterans Day. He had gone to the park because he always went somewhere on Veterans Day, not to any official ceremony, not to the parade downtown, but somewhere quiet, somewhere with open sky, where he could sit and think about names that had never left him. He had done this every November 11th for the past 40 years. Margaret had understood. She always had soup ready when he came home. There was no soup now. He had made it himself the last 4 years, out of habit more than hunger. He had been sitting on his usual bench when the rain started, sudden and cold, the way November rain always is, like a reminder. He had pulled his collar up and was about to leave when he saw her. She was sitting beside the overturned garbage can not 5 yards from his bench, completely soaked, not shivering, not cowering, just sitting, upright, watching him. "Where'd you come from?" he'd said. She had tilted her head, that universal canine punctuation mark. He had looked around for an owner. There was no one. The park was empty. He had waited 10 minutes in the rain, talking to her, telling her someone was probably looking for her. Someone was coming. She just needed to wait. She listened with great patience and showed no sign of going anywhere. At the end of the 10 minutes, he had picked her up, tucked her inside his jacket, and walked home. He had gone to the vet the next morning. No chip, no record, nothing. He'd posted on every lost pet site he could find. No one claimed her. He had kept the date in his mind. Found on November 11th, a Yorkshire Terrier. £4, the vet said, and approximately 2 years old, origin unknown. Healthy, alert, behaviorally. The vet had noted with a slight raise of the eyebrows. Unusually perceptive. William had allowed himself quietly to believe that some things find you for reasons you don't get to fully understand. and that some gifts come without explanation, because the explanation would diminish them. He had not told Daniel about the nights. He hadn't told anyone. It wasn't shame. Exactly. It was more that the nights felt like they belonged only to him. The way certain things are private, not because they're secret, but because they're too interior for language. The night terrors had started in 1971 when he came home. They had lessened in the 80s, gone quiet in the 90s, and then, in a pattern he had read was not unusual, had come back after Margaret died. Grief, the VA therapist had explained during William's 3 visits, can reactivate old trauma. The brain returns to its old wounds when new ones open. William had said thank you and not gone back, which he regretted now, looking back, but which had felt at the time like the only survivable option. He would wake at 2 or 3 a.m. with his heart hammering and the specific, visceral confusion of not knowing where he was. Still there or here, or some combination of the two. For 4 years, after Margaret, he had learned to manage it alone. Lie still, breathe, count the ceiling tiles, remember the address. After Smoky, it was different. She was on the bed before he was fully awake. He didn't know how she knew. He hadn't called her, hadn't moved, had barely made a sound. But she would be there, pressing her small, solid weight against his chest, her chin resting on his sternum, looking at him in the dark with those eyes that caught light like water. Not excited, not alarmed, just present, just there. It worked. He didn't know why. The VA had a name for dogs like that, psychiatric service animals. PTSD dogs. But William hadn't trained her, hadn't sought her out for that purpose. She had simply arrived and made herself useful in ways no one had asked of her. He had read, somewhere, that dogs can detect the physiological precursors to nightmares, heart rate changes, cortisol, micro-movements, before the person is conscious of them. That trained dogs are taught to interrupt the cycle before it peaks. He did not know if Smoky had been trained. He did not know her history. But she had been interrupting his cycles for 6 months, and he had been sleeping, not perfectly, not without some residue of the old darkness, but sleeping, more than before. Some things work for reasons you don't need to fully understand. Margaret had kept things in that stuck drawer, the one Smoky had opened 3 months earlier to return the VA card. William had not opened himself since she died. He had stood in front of it many times, touched the handle, not pulled. On Friday, 5 days after the incident in the street, he opened it. He didn't know what made that the day. Nothing special about Friday, gray sky, birds, the distant mechanical sound of a leaf blower. Smoky was sitting in the kitchen in the morning light, looking at something only she could see. He walked to the drawer. He pulled. It came open easily this time. It had always been stiff before, which swollen with the steam from the old radiator. But it came open easily, as if it had been opened and closed recently, which of course it had. Inside, birthday cards, Christmas cards, letters in his own handwriting from when they were dating. He had not known she had kept them. A folded piece of paper that turned out to be a poem she had written in college. Never shown him. Not particularly polished, but full of the particular light of a young person trying to describe the feeling of being alive. A photograph. He sat down at the kitchen table with the photograph. It was from 1987, the year they moved in. He could tell from the state of the garden, new and optimistic, not yet grown in. He was standing at the gate, younger, thinner, laughing at something she had said. He could tell from the angle of his body that he had been caught mid-sentence. And at his feet, half out of frame, was a dog, a small dog, terrier mix, light-colored, looking up at him. He had forgotten about that dog. Her name had been Penny. She had died in 1999. He had thought she was entirely gone from his life, from his memory. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at Smoky, who had come to sit beside his chair, and was looking at the photograph too, or appeared to be, her eyes aimed in its direction with that steady attentiveness. "I don't believe in most things," William told her, "but I believe in a few." Smoky put her paw on his foot. He put the photograph on the corkboard, beside the picture of Margaret and the largemouth bass. Claire had worried about the article. She was not a trained writer. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and organized the HOA newsletter out of an abundance of civic energy, and she was aware that the story was not hers to tell. Not really, and that she needed to handle it with the care that other people's histories deserve. She had asked William for an interview, and he had agreed, which surprised her a little. He had not struck her, initially, as a man who welcomed attention, but he had told her, simply, that he'd thought about it, and the story felt like it was ready to be told now. Not before. Now. They sat on his porch. Smoky sat between them like a moderator. Claire had a notebook and a recorder, and was nervously clicking her pen when Smoky reached over and put her nose directly on Claire's hand. Claire went still. Then she laughed, a surprised, genuine laugh, and put the pen down. The conversation lasted 2 hours. William talked about the war carefully, not the details, but the shape of it, the weight, what you carry forward, and what you learn to set down, and what you can never fully separate. He talked about Margaret and the roses and the tag, and what it meant that Smoky had found it. He was honest about why he'd buried it. He was honest about what the last 4 years had been like, alone in a house. I don't tell you this for sympathy, he clarified. I tell you because I think it's important that people know what it costs. Not just going, coming back. Coming back is its own campaign, and it's fought without a unit. Claire wrote that down verbatim. She put it in the article. She used it as the closing line. The newsletter went out the following week. She printed 40 copies. She put it in 40 mailboxes. By Sunday, 12 of her neighbors had called or texted her. One woman, who had never spoken to William, knocked on his door with a handwritten letter that she pushed through the mail slot and then walked quickly away. William found it on the hallway floor. It was from a daughter of a veteran. Her father had also come home from Vietnam and had also never talked about it and had died in 2011 without ever talking about it. She had read William's story and she said, needed somewhere to put what she felt. He wrote back. He always wrote back. The call came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the street incident. William almost didn't answer. He had learned to be selective with unknown numbers, the way anyone who has reached his age has learned. But something, habit, or Smoky sudden alert posture, or some instinct that operates below the level of thought, made him pick up, is this William Hartley? 4th Infantry Division, 68 to 71. The voice was old, male, slightly rough at the edges, like the voice of someone who had smoked once and quit long ago. Who's asking? William said. My name is Gerald Bautista. I was told. A fella named Raymond Cho called the post and mentioned you. I've been meaning to call for 3 days, and I keep not doing it. And this morning I decided that's foolish. So I'm calling. A pause. I was in the 4th, 67 to 70. William sat down in his chair. Smoky was on his lap before he'd fully settled. I remember Bautista, William said carefully. There were a few. Jerry Bautista, from Fresno originally. I was a corporal. The name connected to a face, younger, broader, with a particular energy of someone who laughed too loud as a defense mechanism. You used to sing, William said, in the mornings, off-key. A sharp, surprised laugh on the other end. Still do. My wife says it's a crime against music. The laugh faded into something quieter. Bill Hartley, I didn't know you were in Connecticut. 30 years, William said. Clover Street. Raymond Cho says you've got a dog that finds things. That's approximately correct. He told me the story about the tag. Another pause. I've been thinking about it all week. I didn't bury mine. I still have it in a box in the bedroom. Closet. I look at it sometimes. I know what it costs to look at it. Yes, William said. I'm not a man who usually makes phone calls like this, Gerald said. But I'm 78 years old, and I'm done waiting for things to happen on their own. A breath. Would you want to come by the post sometime? Not for anything official. Just a cup of coffee. A conversation. William looked out his window at Clover Street. The Patel kids were drawing something on the sidewalk with chalk. Mrs. Delgado was in her garden. Raymond's car was in the driveway, and there was light in his kitchen window. Yes, William said. I think I would. Raymond drove him. This had not been planned. William had intended to take a cab, but Raymond had appeared at the door on Saturday morning with his car keys and a thermos in a manner that suggested he had made up his mind and was presenting the decision as a courtesy rather than a negotiation. William had looked at him, looked at Smoky. Smoky had gone to the door with the bearing of someone who found the ride arrangement entirely reasonable. All right, William said. They drove mostly in silence, which was comfortable in the way that silences between people who had an honest conversation can be comfortable. Smoky sat in the back seat in a carrier William had bought from the pet store. He had compromised on the HOA rules. She now had proper documentation and a pink vaccination record and a tag of her own, though hers was engraved with a small paw print instead of a serial number. The VFW post was a low building on a side street, with a flagpole and a modest sign, and a parking lot that held 8 cars on this particular Saturday morning. Raymond pulled in and left the engine running. You'll be all right? He said. I've been all right for 50 years, William said. One VFW post isn't going to change that. Raymond nodded. I'll be back at noon. You don't have to. I'll be back at noon, Raymond said again, not unkindly. William got out. He took Smoky in her carrier. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the building, and felt the particular gravity of a place where people have gathered around a shared, unspoken weight. Even before you go in, you can feel it. He went in. Gerald Bautista was at the second table from the door, broad, silver-haired, wearing a flannel shirt and an expression of someone trying to look casual and not quite succeeding. He stood up when William came in. He was shorter than William remembered. Or William was shorter than he remembered. Something like that. They shook hands. You look terrible, Gerald said. You look old, William said. They both laughed. It was a laugh of people who understand the currency of honesty. Gerald Bautista had come home from Vietnam with both his tags, a Purple Heart he kept in the same box, and a hearing loss in his left ear that he'd been compensating for ever since. He had married a woman from Hartford named Rose, had 3 daughters, had worked in construction management for 30 years. He was now, in his words, professionally retired, meaning he drove his grandchildren to soccer practice and managed a garden and read military history because understanding what he'd been part was something he was still working on. He and William sat at the table for 3 hours. Smoky sat on the table. The man who ran the post had looked at her and then looked at William and then said nothing, which was the right decision, and watched both of them with the attention of a small archivist. They did not talk about the worst of it. They didn't need to. They talked around it the way experienced people talk around things that are too large for direct address, through the specific, the tangential, the small details that contain the large ones. A particular hill. The name of a cook who had made inexplicably good coffee under impossible conditions. The sound of a certain helicopter. The color of the light at a certain time of morning. And in between Portland and Sunday calls, Fresno and daughters, a largemouth bass in a garden. The way grief works on a person who thought they had already processed everything there was to process. My Rose says grief isn't linear, Gerald said. She's a social worker. She says it comes back in waves. She's right, William said. She usually is. He reached into his shirt pocket and put his dog tag on the table between them. Different from William's, different chain, different era of stamp, but the same. I take it out sometimes and look at it. It's gotten easier over the years. Still not easy, just easier. William took his own tag from his breast pocket. He'd been carrying it since Smoky found it, unable to put it down again after picking it up, and set it on the table beside Gerald's. They sat there, 2 tags, 2 old men, 1 small dog who was, at this moment, pressing her nose to each tag in turn with precision that could only be described as ceremonial. "What does she do that for?" Gerald asked. "She pays attention," William said. "It's what she does." Gerald looked at Smoky for a long moment. Then he said, "Good dog." Smoky looked at him in a way that suggested she was aware of the compliment and had formed her own view of its merit. Daniel arrived on a Friday afternoon in early December with June and Leo, 3 suitcases, and a Christmas wreath he'd made himself from something he'd found at a nursery in Portland. June was 7. Leo was 10. They had Hartley eyes, steady, watchful, and their mother's laugh, quick and genuine. William had prepared the house in the way people prepare for visits from the people they love most, slightly overcleaned, with the particular anxious tidiness of wanting things to be good. There was soup on the stove, the photograph of Margaret, and the fish was dusted. He had put the dog tag back in a small wooden box he'd found in the basement, set on the windowsill in the kitchen, where it caught the light. Smoky sat in the hallway when they arrived. June saw her first. June went completely still in the doorway, which was a right response. Not rushing, not squealing, just stopping and looking. Smoky looked back. "Hi," June said, in the careful voice children use when they sense something worth handling gently. Smoky walked to her, sat in front of her, let June crouch down and offer her hand, sniffed it with great thoroughness, then stepped forward and pressed the top of her head against June's palm. June looked up at William with an expression of such transparent joy that he had to look away for a moment. Leo shook William's hand with the solemnity of a boy who had been told to be respectful and had taken the instructions seriously. He was at that age where being serious seemed like the most important thing a person could be. William shook back with equal gravity. "Good grip," William said. "That matters." Leo processed this, filed it somewhere. That evening, all 5 of them, William, Daniel, June, Leo, and Smoky, sat at the kitchen table, and William told the story of the tag. He told it the whole way through, calmly, without leaving things out that were important to leave in. June listened with her hands flat on the table. Leo listened with his jaw set. Daniel sat quietly and looked at his father with the expression of a man who is learning something he hadn't known he needed to know. When William finished, June said, "She knew where it was the whole time?" "I think she did," William said. "Because she was paying attention," June said. "Yes." June looked at Smoky, who was on the bench beside her. "I pay attention, too," she informed the dog. Smoky licked June's wrist once, precisely, and looked away. The call from the memory care facility came on a Wednesday in December, while Raymond was in a work meeting, which he stepped out of immediately. Not an emergency. The nurse was careful to say that first, but something she thought he should know about. His father, James Cho, had been having a better week, not a common occurrence, and not predictable. But this week, James had been more present than usual, recognizing faces, initiating conversations, asking for things by name. And on Tuesday, James had asked for Raymond by name. And when Raymond wasn't there, James had told the nursing staff a story about his service, about Korea, about something he'd never, in Raymond's entire life, spoken of directly. He'd told them about a friend, a man who had been alongside him during a particular operation. Raymond didn't know the details, and the nurse was vague about them, and who hadn't come back. James had described this man with a precision that suggested the memory was completely intact, preserved perfect and untouched in some part of his brain that the disease hadn't yet reached. He described what this man looked like, how he talked, the particular way he laughed. And then he'd said, "The nurse reported, I never told him what he meant to me. There wasn't time, and then there wasn't a way." Raymond had driven to Connecticut that same evening. He'd sat with his father for 4 hours. James had known him for 2 of them, And Raymond had said, with less eloquence than he would have wanted, and more truth than he'd ever managed before, what his father meant to him. He wasn't sure James had fully taken it in. He said it anyway. On the drive home, he stopped at a rest area and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Not crying, exactly, something that was adjacent to it and took its time resolving. He went home. He knocked on William's door the next morning. Smoky opened it ahead of William, which was a joke between them now. She had figured out the door handle, though she required assistance with the turning mechanism, and settled instead for sitting on the right side and staring at it until William opened it. "My father talked," Raymond said, "about Korea." William moved aside to let him in. "Come have coffee," he said. "I want to hear it." The teacher's name was Ms. Anand, young, organized, the kind of calm that came from managing 22 second graders daily. She had asked again about a school visit after the newsletter article, and this time William had said yes. He had reasons he hadn't had before. He came on a Thursday. Raymond drove him. Smoky came in the carrier, certified and documented, with her proper identification and her vaccination record and her small paw print tag. William wore his army jacket, the old one, faded at the elbows, for the first time in public in many years. The class was arranged in a semicircle on the rug when he came in. 22 children, ages 6 and 7, looking at him with complete and uncomplicating attention that children bring to the world before they learn to filter it. One boy in the front row had a loose tooth he was working at with his tongue. One girl had her hand raised before William had even sat down. "Yes," he said. "Is that the dog?" she asked. There was some negotiation around Smoky. She was permitted to be held, one at a time, under supervision, and this produced a particular controlled chaos of 22 children, each urgently needing to be the one holding the dog. Smoky, to her lasting credit, submitted to this with the patient grace of someone on official duty. William talked about the Army. He kept it appropriate. The uniform, the training, the concept of service, the idea that doing something hard for others is one of the most important things a person can do. He talked about what it meant to help people who were hurt. He did not talk about the specific things he had seen. The kids were 6. There was time. He talked about the tag. He held it up. The children were transfixed by the small metal object, the same way children are always transfixed by things that carry history. Coins, photographs, objects that have survived longer than seems possible. "How did she find it?" asked the boy with the loose tooth. "She paid attention," William said. "She always pays attention." "Can she find other things?" "She can find many things," William said. He looked at Smoky, who was on a girl's lap in the second row, and looking back at him. "She finds what needs to be found." Ms. Anand, in the back of the room, was writing something in her notebook. Later, William would find out she'd written, "She finds what needs to be found." She'd put it on the wall above the classroom door. He had not, in all the years since it happened, looked directly at the thing he had most needed to look at. The tag was a symbol of it, a surface, a shorthand. The thing itself was a name, several names. The people he hadn't been able to save, whose faces he still carried with a fidelity that his memory applied to almost nothing else. He had been protecting himself from looking directly at those names. He understood this now. He had understood it, in pieces, for years. But understanding and acting on understanding are different operations. In December, with Daniel in the house and the tag on the windowsill, and Smoky sleeping across his feet, William took out the composition notebook he'd kept in 1971 when he first came home. The VA therapist at the time had encouraged journaling, and he'd done it for 3 months before stopping, and read it for the first time since he had written it. He had expected it to be unbearable. It was, instead, something stranger. It was the voice of a 24-year-old man who was trying, in imperfect and halting language, to make sense of things that hadn't made sense yet. A young man doing his best. He read his own words and felt, for the first time, Something like compassion for that person, the one who had come home and not known how to be home. He wrote down the names, the ones he carried. He wrote them clearly and carefully in the back of the composition notebook, and then he sat with them for a long time. Smoky woke up at some point and repositioned herself, moved from his feet to his lap, turned in a circle, settled. She put her head on the notebook. He left it there. He said the names out loud, once, quietly, to the empty kitchen and the morning light and the dog. It was not absolution. He didn't believe in absolution. It was acknowledgement, which was, he had come to understand, different and sufficient and long overdue. Gerald Bautista had a granddaughter named Maya who was 16 and furious in a way that the best 16-year-olds are furious, righteous, specific, taking aim at things that deserved to be aimed at. She had heard the story about William and Smoky from Gerald, who had told it the way old men tell stories, at length with digressions twice. Maya had found a newsletter article online and read it 3 times and then done something none of the adults had expected. She'd submitted it to her school's literary magazine as a piece of community journalism. It won the feature category. She asked if she could come meet him. William said yes, on the condition that she had questions. She came on a Saturday, notebook in hand, with the specific energy of a person who has thought hard about what she wants to ask and is determined not to waste opportunity. Gerald drove her. Smoky approved of Maya immediately and sat on her notebook for the duration of the interview, which was inconvenient for Maya and non-negotiable for Smoky. Maya's questions were good, not what William expected from 16, not surface questions, not facts, but the things underneath. What does it feel like to carry something for 50 years? How did you decide when to open the drawer? What does the dog know that you don't? I don't know what she knows, William said. That's the honest answer. I know what she does. She's present. She pays attention. She finds things. What she knows, that's her business. Do you think she was sent to you? Maya asked. She was direct in the way of someone who has decided that the cost of being indirect is higher than the cost of embarrassment. I think, he considered it, I think some things arrive at the right time, whether they're sent or whether it's something else. I don't know. I'm not sure it matters. What matters is that you receive them when they come. You don't let them sit in the rain. Maya wrote that down, then looked up, like you received her. Yes, like I received her. Maya looked at Smoky, who was still on the notebook, watching Maya with interested calm. I think she knows exactly what she's doing, Maya said. William looked at Smoky. I think so, too. I just don't think she needs to explain it. December on Clover Street went dark early and cold, and the neighborhood took on that particular winter quality of turning inward. Lights in windows earlier, the smell of wood smoke, less traffic, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but accumulation. William liked winter. He had always liked it, even the hard ones. There was something honest about it. He had settled into a routine with Smoky that had the feeling of something long established, though it was still only 8 months old. Morning, coffee, walk, 3 blocks counterclockwise, bird watching from the kitchen window, which Smoky took seriously, and William participated incompanionably. Afternoon, reading, small tasks, the radio on low. Evening, dinner, sometimes a phone call. The 9 o'clock news, which William watched partly for information and partly for the ritual of it. Then bed, where Smoky established herself in her position of strategic proximity, and the nights were, most nights, manageable. He had gone back to the VFW post 4 times now. Gerald was usually there on Saturdays. Other men, too. Different wars, different decades. The same weight carried in different shapes. William had begun to understand that the post was not what he'd thought it would be when he'd avoided it. He'd thought it would be a place where the war was kept alive in a way that he didn't want it kept. Instead, it was a place where the people who had been to war could be around other people who understood what that meant, without having to explain it, which was its own kind of relief. He brought Smoky once. She was a moderate sensation. Gerald's friend, Pete, a Vietnam vet who had not warmed anything quickly in 40 years, had called her ridiculous and then spent 20 minutes with her on his lap, which was its own kind of communication. "She's good for this place," Gerald told William privately. "She's good for most places," William said. "She's good for you." William acknowledged this without argument, which was, for him, as close to effusive agreement as he got. He had written her letters, in the beginning, before the internet, before the satellite calls that some soldiers got toward the end, paper letters, written in the field, mailed from wherever there was a way to mail them. She had kept them. He had not known she kept them. He had not gone back to them because he'd assumed they were gone. They were in the drawer. Of course they were. He brought them to Gerald's kitchen one Saturday. Gerald had started hosting coffee in addition to the Post, and between the two of them and Rose Bautista, who was a social worker and had, over the past month, quietly positioned herself as someone William was allowed to be honest with, they went through them. Not all. There were 11, and they got through 4. The letters were not what he'd feared. They were not trauma records. They were, he searched for the word, alive. He had been 22, 23, writing to the woman he loved from a place he couldn't describe to her fully. And what had come through was the essential him, observational, drilly funny at times, earnest in a way he had not let himself be in many years. He had written about the light. He had written about a particular mountain range he could see from a certain position. He had written about what he was looking forward to, which mostly involved Margaret and coffee, and a long drive to somewhere with no particular agenda. "You were in love," Rose said, as if this were both obvious and remarkable. "I was," William said. "You still are," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Love doesn't end because the person does. It just changes what it has to work with. Rose wrote that down. Gerald told her she was always writing things down. She told him it was because people said important things and didn't notice. He said that was true of her. She said it was true of most people. They had clearly had some version of this exchange before and found it comfortable. William folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. He would read the others. Not all at once. One at a time, with sufficient space between. That felt right. Daniel called on a Sunday in January, the usual time, the usual signal of the alarm set the night before. They talked about Leo's soccer season and June's ongoing campaign to adopt a second dog, position of William. Supportive, position of Daniel. Cautious, position of Smoky. Unreadable, and a building Daniel was working on in Portland. Something sustainable, something he cared about. Near the end of the call, Daniel said, "Dad, can I ask you something? You've never asked for permission before. I want to ask it right." A pause. "Were you happy? Are you? I know it's been hard since Mom. I know the nights are, I know more than I let on, Dad. Are you okay?" William sat with a question. He gave it the time it deserved. "I am," he said. "Not in the way I was when your mother was alive. That kind of happiness. That specific combination. That's done. I know that. But there's another kind. Quieter. More," he searched. "More earned, maybe." Gerald, and the letters, and the tag on the windowsill. The school kids. Your kids. Raymond, who turned out to be a human being, which I didn't initially expect. Daniel laughed. "And the dog," William said. "She changed something. I don't know how else to say it. Before her, I was existing in this house. Now I'm living in it. There's a difference." "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "There's a big difference." "I want you to know," William stopped, started again. "I should have talked more, over the years, about the war, about what it cost. I thought protecting you from it was the right thing. I think now I was wrong. Not wrong to protect you. Wrong to think silence was protection. It was just distance. Dad, I'm not saying it as a confession. I'm saying it because I want to talk more now, if you want to hear it." "I want to hear it," Daniel said. I've always wanted to hear it. I know, William said. I know, son. In February, William made a decision he had not expected to make. He framed the tag. Not in any elaborate way. A simple shadow box, wood glass, the kind you could buy at a craft store. He cleaned the tag carefully and polished it to the degree it could be polished, which was not much. The tarnish was old and deep and partly what was now. He laid it inside the shadow box on a piece of dark cloth. He added nothing else. No label, no date, no explanation. The tag spoke for itself, if you knew how to read it. He hung it in the hallway, between the photograph of Margaret with the fish and a small watercolor June had mailed him after Christmas, a picture of Smoky, rendered in careful, serious strokes of blue and gray and silver. He stood in the hallway and looked at the arrangement for a while. Smoky sat beside him and looked at it too, or appeared to. Her eyes were aimed in the right direction, and she had the quality of focused consideration. You did that, William told her, not accusingly, just factually. She did not dispute it. I don't know how, he said. I don't know why that pot, or why that day, or how you knew to dig. I've been thinking about it for months, and I don't have an answer. Maybe I don't need one. He looked at the tag in the shadow box. His name, his number, his blood type, the year that had defined him more than any year before or since. Margaret used to say that the things we bury always find their way up eventually, he said. She thought it was true of flowers. I think she meant more than flowers. He looked at Smoky. I think she sent you. Smoky looked back at him, the kind of look that neither confirmed nor denied, but held the question open in a way that felt somehow like company. He reached down and scratched behind her ears. She leaned into his hand. Good girl, he said. Best girl. James Cho died in February, on a Tuesday, quietly, in his sleep, which is what everyone says is the best way in which Raymond thought might be true, and also thought didn't make the Tuesday any less hard. He called Raymond at 6 a.m., and Raymond drove up alone, and was back by evening. And William only knew about it because he saw the light in Raymond's kitchen at 11 p.m. when he got up for water. He watched the light for a while. Then he put on his jacket and went across the street and knocked. Raymond answered looking like a man who had been trying to hold his shape and had given up somewhere around 9 o'clock. Not destroyed. Raymond was not the destroying kind, but hollowed out in the temporary way that the first days of loss can make a person. William came in. He didn't say much. He made tea. Raymond had an electric kettle, and the tea was already on the counter, which suggested Raymond had been thinking about making tea without being able to actually make it. They sat in the kitchen at the island. He knew me, Raymond said. At the end, last month, I told you that visit, he was clear, he knew who I was. He told me, Raymond stopped. He told me he was proud of me. I hadn't heard that. Not in those words. He wasn't. It wasn't how he communicated. He looked at his tea. I almost didn't get there in time. I almost didn't make the call. But you did, William said. But I did. The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Raymond's wife was asleep, and there was a small sound of the house existing around them. He served, Raymond said. Korea. He never talked about it. And now he stopped again. There are things I'll never know now. Stories I'll never hear. Yes, William said. That's true. He paused. But you were there. At the end, you were there and he knew it. And you said what you needed to say. That counts. That's not nothing. That's the thing. Raymond looked at him. How do you live with what you don't get to know? You make do with what you have, William said. And you pay attention to the things that are still here. That's all I've got for you. It's the only answer I found. They finished their tea. William walked home at midnight in the cold February air. And Smoky met him at the door and pressed against his legs until he sat down, and then climbed up and stayed until he was warm. She turned 3 in the spring, or approximately 3, the vet's estimate, recalibrated at her annual visit. She was healthy, vigorous, had strong opinions about the morning walk route, and had recently developed a complex relationship with a particular squirrel in Mrs. Delgado's oak tree that appeared to be mutual and competitive. She had become, without anyone deciding this, something of a neighborhood institution. The Patel kids stopped to pet her every morning. June, on visits, treated her as a co-pilot and confidant. Gerald's granddaughter Maya had featured her in a second article for her school magazine, this one about therapy animals and military veterans, which had been picked up by a regional paper and had resulted in several letters to William from veterans he didn't know in other states, which he answered one by one, carefully, with the deliberateness he brought to things that mattered. William had started going to the VA's group sessions, not the ones he tried in 2020 and not completed, but a different program, newer, run by a woman named Dr. Osei, who had a gift for making rooms feel safe. He went twice a month. He didn't talk every session. When he did talk, it was useful. Smoky came once to a session designated as a welcome visit for service animals, and had sat in the center of the circle with the gravity of a small official and had let every person in the room spend time with her. Dr. Osei had told William afterward that it was one of the more powerful sessions she'd run. "She has a gift," Dr. Osei said. "Everyone keeps saying that," William said, "because it's true." He had accepted it by now. The strangeness of Smoky, the particularity of her attention, the things she found and the things she seemed to know. He had stopped trying to explain it and had started simply living alongside it, which was, he suspected, closer to the right relationship with mystery. By late spring, Clover Street had become something it had not been before, a place where people knew each other. Not just recognized, knew. The Patel family had Raymond and his wife over for dinner twice. Claire's newsletter was now 4 pages instead of 1. Mrs. Delgado had started a garden swap, and William had contributed Rose seedlings from a plant he'd grown from Margaret's original roses, which had turned out to be not entirely dead, but dormant, and had come back in the warming, whether with a stubbornness that seemed like a message. William had not, in 31 years on this street, exchanged more than pleasantries with most of these people. Now Raymond dropped by twice a week, and usually brought something from the bakery on Elm. Gerald came over once a month. Daniel brought the kids in the summer. And June and Leo had begun to treat the house as a second home, which was what William had always, secretly, hoped it might be for someone after he was gone. The tag was in its shadow box. The letters were in a folder that Daniel had helped him organize, and copies had been made, and the originals were in a fireproof box in the closet. The composition notebook from 1971 was on the bookshelf, not hidden, just there beside the books, where it had a right to be. The names were written in the back. They were not gone. They were in ink, in his handwriting, in a book that would outlast him. It was not enough. It never would be entirely enough. But it was something, a way of saying I have not forgotten, I will not forget. You existed, and I was there and I remember. And something William had learned was the most honest thing a person could offer to the irreducible weight of the past. He sat on the porch one evening in June with Smoky on his lap, and Gerald, and Rose 2 chairs over, and the street in its summer mode. Kids on bikes. Sprinklers. The ambient noise of a neighborhood being inhabited. He held a glass of iced tea. He was not doing anything in particular. He was present. That was enough. "You're smiling," Gerald observed. "I am," William said. "What at?" William considered the question. At this, he thought, all of this, the porch and the street, and the old friend, and the roses and the dog, and the tag in the hallway, and the letters in the box, and the son, who called on Sundays, and the granddaughter who asked smart questions, and the neighbor who turned out to be a person, and a November morning in the park, when he had stood in the rain, and a small dog had decided he was worth waiting for. At everything, he said. Nothing special. Just everything. There's a version of the story that ends with an explanation, a scientific one, a spiritual one, a dramatic revelation about Smoky's history or training or origin. That version is neater. It is not this version. This version ends on an ordinary morning in late summer. William is 74 years old and has a drag in his left leg and a shadow box in his hallway and roses in the garden and a phone that rings on Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock. He is not the same man. He was the morning Raymond came to his door with a clipboard and a small audience. He is more legible, to the street, to his son, to himself. He has not become someone new. He has become more fully who he was. Smoky is on the kitchen table, technically forbidden, completely unregulated, watching the birds in the garden with the focused calm of someone who has important thoughts and is taking her time with them. She is 3 years old. She has 4 pounds in storm cloud fur and eyes that hold conversations. She found a military dog tag buried in a clay pot beside a garden gate. She finds things. She pays attention. She is present. What does she know? She knows, probably, the things dogs know, scent and sound, and the physical registers of the people she loves. The changes in heart rate, the cortisol spike before the nightmare, the grief that sits in a room after a person leaves it. She knows William the way perhaps only animals and very honest people know those they choose, without the filter of what he presents, right down to the frequency of him. Does she know what the tag meant? Does she know who Margaret was, who the names are in the back of the notebook, what November 11th costs? Does she know she is doing something healing by simply being present and persistent and trustworthy? William doesn't know. William has stopped needing to know. She looks at him from the kitchen table, and he looks back at her, and something passes between them that has no name in any language. Then she steps delicately across the table, steps from the table to his shoulder, 4 pounds, nimble as a rumor, and settles there, watching the garden with him, her chin resting against his jaw. He sits with her. The morning goes on. The birds move in and out of the roses. The wind chime makes its small music. Somewhere out there, the street is waking up, the neighbors beginning their days, the world running at its usual complicated pace. In here for this hour, it is quiet and sufficient. "Good morning," William says. Smoky doesn't answer. She doesn't need to. She is already here. I serve this country, but no one believed him until Smoky proved it.